Greetings, it is I, Tantus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It's time to continue our discussion on Advanced Dungeons & Dragons, the second edition of AD&D. Where we last left off, we've been diving into combat, and more on the side of what you as a dungeon master might need to know for combat related to everything with your characters. Of course, a character, you might want to know about some of these things, so as a player, it's fine for you to learn about them also. Now let's dive into some more of the more unique combat situations with mounted combat. That's the big one I'm going to talk about today. Now, with a mounted combat, your mount, whatever it would be, you're riding on top of some kind of creature. Traditionally, it's a horse, but it could be really anything. It's a fantasy world, fantasy game. It comes in two basic types. Is it trained at going into combat, or is it untrained at going into combat? Regardless, you have to have some skill at it because it's a different kind of thing entirely, fighting on top of this creature. You're going to need an entirely different set of skills in comparison to when you're on the ground fighting against something. Now, normally, if your creature is trained to go into combat, whatever it would be, you're perfectly fine. You don't have to worry about anything. When it's untrained to go into combat, that's when you start having to worry. You're going to have to make riding proficiency checks should your creature take any sort of damage or get into circumstances when it gets spooked, because that's the difference between an untrained and trained creature. The untrained one could much easier get spooked in the middle of combat and be driven away. So if you fail your check, guess what? Your creature's running away. Now, this means it's going to move at 1.5 times its normal movement rate, and it's going to move, well, normally it will move wherever it's facing, or if the danger or whatever it's spooked it is there, some other direction, and it's going to move in a straight line in that direction, away from wherever you were. If it's blocked in, it's kind of going to rear back and, kind of try to hoof anything or smack anything that's coming after it. Now, the big thing here that we have to note, regardless if your creature is running away, is because it can run away, and because it is untrained at fighting and combat, you actually get a penalty to combat when riding on it. You get -2, because you're going to have to spend some time stabilizing the creature you're riding on, keeping it under control. And this is beyond if you get it to run away. That's even worse of a problem. Normally, it's just sort of maintaining it in the normal battle. Now, if you're untrained at the riding proficiency, you can't actually prevent your untrained mount from running away. It's just going to. You automatically fail that check. On the other hand, if you are trained and you begin to run away, you can try once per round making a riding check in order to regain control of your mount. Regardless, either way, it only panics for 1d4 rounds, kind of running away before it stops and starts to calm down. So depending on the circumstance that it did, it drove it off only a little bit. Now you do have other combat advantages though, when it relates to it. We talked about the -2, but that's just with untrained. You do get some advantages when fighting it. If you're fighting something smaller than the combination of you and the mount, you get a +1 to hit it. That means if I'm a normal man-sized person and I'm fighting man-sized people on the grounds, I get +1 to hit it when I'm fighting off with my horse. They get -1 to hit me. They get no penalties when fighting my horse, though, so they might target my horse instead of me. Now, a traditional weapon of a mounted combat is, of course, the lance. The lance comes in 3 sizes, and you can't have a lance smaller than the size of the creature you have. So if you have a small horse, you can of course go down to small lance, but if you have a large horse, you really can only use a large lance associated with it. Medium and large lances are not useful in normal melee combat. They are made that you get a one big charge in using the momentum of the creature you're on in order to deal most of the damage. They're a big first round weapon. So you're going to charge in that first round of combat and try to hit someone with your lance. If you want to keep using it, you're going to have to spend an extra turn sort of wheeling around, moving away from the creature on top of your horse, and then turn around and smack him again. So it is really a weapon, a medium or heavy lance, that you'd use every other turn. Now there is another disadvantage. Those sizes of lance are pretty fragile. They're going to have to make a save versus basically getting that impact against them every time you hit something with them. They can break very often. So lances, they're not the most practical thing. Small lances are a little more flexible, so they definitely have a chance of surviving the attack and continuing on. More traditionally, most people are going to use a lance, charging up on it, hitting the opponent, dropping the lance, moving on to another weapon, whether it's long sword, mace, whatever. They're going to switch their weapons to something else and continue their assault. Now you can use, of course, ranged weapons, missile weapons, when you're mounted. First off, you have to have horsemanship proficiency in order to do this. That's the big thing. And that gives you easy access to short bow, composite short bow, or light crossbow. Those are perfectly fine to use during this point in time. If you have proficiency in them is the first thing. If you have proficiency in a longbow and you're specializing in it, using the specialization rules, that is also one you have access to. You are technically allowed to use a heavy crossbow, but you can't reload it. Being on mounted horseback, you don't have a situation that you can't brace yourself in such a way that you can reload that heavy crossbow. So it's a one-time fire. The light crossbow, you can reload that. Now, the big disadvantage for fighting on mounted combat is your rate of fire, whatever it would be for the weapons you have, is reduced by 1. Meaning you're getting 1 less shot off than you normally would with this ranged attack because you're on mounted horseback. You also get penalties to your attack. This is going to be based around, of course, how much of your animal's speed it's moving. What percentage of its maximum speed you're going at will give you more and more penalties. If it's moving along really slowly, a little sort of short move, it's a lot less movement than if it's booking at its full speed. Now, there are times you're going to want to get someone off of horseback. You're going to want to drop them off onto the ground so that you can fight them easier. There's a couple of ways you can go about this. Easiest. You can kill the horse, or the mount. You can target that until it dies. When the mount dies, it of course falls to the ground. It takes its rider with it. The rider can attempt a riding check in order to basically land on their feet. If not, they're sort of pinned down to the ground. They take 1d3 damage, and they have to spend an entire round basically collecting themselves up from the heap that they've been dropped in. Now, you might not want to kill the horse. Maybe capturing the horse for whatever reason would be useful, so get rid of the rider. You could use a weapon like a lasso in order to try to grab on them and pull them off. It doesn't necessarily have to be a lasso, it'd be a lasso-like weapon. So if you successfully lassoed your target, that person then gets an actual free attempt to stop the animal short. Effectively, they are allowed to make a riding proficiency check, and if they succeed at it, they've effectively stopped their animal short. That means you don't draw taunt on that lasso. They've managed to be like, oh, whoa, wait a second, I'm caught by something, I should stop. If they failed, of course, they're just going to be pulled. But regardless if they've pulled it taunt or not, regardless if you're successfully stopping short or not, the person that lassoed you, or the similar weapon, that person that's hitting the rider, has to make a strength check. If they are larger than the rider, they get +3 for every size they are larger than the rider. If they're smaller than the rider, -3. But then that gives them an idea of how much... It's based on the rider, not the mount, that the lasso is. Another way is weapon hitting. Weapon hitting comes in 2 forms. If I'm a rider hitting another rider, I can possibly knock someone out of their other mount. If I get a natural 20, basically I'm hitting them really well, they have to make a riding check or I'm knocking them out of the saddle. I'm knocking them down to the ground, they take an extra 1d4 damage, I'm kind of smacking them off with the weapon. A person on the ground with a 10-foot long weapon, effectively some kind of pole arm, can do the exact same. They can also just jab it into knock someone off their horse. But they need that long weapon. Otherwise, the person that's fighting on horseback actually has to have a decent weapon to get a throw in there. So it has to be a decent length, maybe 4 foot, and kind of go whack if I'm up on horseback against someone else on horseback. So that's it for today. I began to introduce you to mounted combat and talking about all the rules about it. I talked about the 2 types of mount, trained and untrained, and what it means to control them, before moving into attacking from it, starting with, of course, lances, the basic type of it, moving on to talking about using bows and arrows, and then going over some basics of maybe I want to get someone off of a mount, knock them off. In the next episode, I have only a few more things to talk about when it comes to knocking someone off their horse, or other similar animal, and then I'm going to move on to aerial combat. This is more of both mounted aerial combat and normal aerial combat, and then start moving over towards underwater combat. So, if you have any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the Empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link in the description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.